Welcome back to the 299th episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through some of the top stories, including how a Fed rate cut is not actually going to save us with the economic issues that we're having right now that we saw at the beginning of this week. Also, we're going to talk about Disney and as a major stock in the economy, how they kind of predict things and what quarter or what areas they did well this quarter and what not. And then also talking about artificial intelligence in the election. And of course, we went today with our daily delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive and ready to take on the day. Now, that's enough rambling for me. Let's jump into our dip, dive, and dodge segment. Roll the intro here.
Let's get ready to dip, dive, and dodge.
All right, so given enough time to roll the intro, how this actually goes down is politicians on a normal basis have to dip, dive, dodge around questions that they don't want to answer. So how this works, I get proposed a question, or I will propose myself a question that I've run through ChatGPT to give me a prompt, which says, okay, this is issue number one, and then you have to pivot. I pretend I'm the politician at this point, and I say, whoa, okay, no, your topic's cool, but I actually had this briefing when I came out today that I really need to talk about X, Y, and Z. And we can see how well or how terribly I can pivot while also putting in there a little bit of self-promotion. So if you don't understand still, maybe you'll understand when we just go through it. Let's try it out. So I will take on the persona of the reporter at this point. Well, Governor Smith, in our great state of Montana, we understand that we have a lot of industries that are falling by the wayside, and under your tenure, we've actually seen a small decline in the amount of rural working locations and industries that provide these vital jobs. There has been a recent proposal for a Workforce Mobility Enhancement Act, so where the state would actually come in and provide resources and actually supplement some people's pay in order to help them relocate to different rural areas where these industries are failing. This is something that is being pushed by both sides of the aisle. What do you say to it? Now, as governor of Montana, thank you so much, my diligent reporter from the Montana Press. I understand that many people are struggling in this economy. I understand that many small towns are facing a hard time right now. And honestly, I think that this industrial policy is a little bit heavy-handed. What I would rather see is an attempt to actually revitalize our small towns by giving them a small amount of grants or maybe local business grants. So when you have multiple small businesses located within a main street area, we know that these bring in lots of jobs, but they also bring in lots of economic investment and opportunity, and they bring the community together. So I would much rather use that money that you want to spend on heavy-handed industrial policy and put it into more of a service sector kind of focus. And this is something that we talk about regularly on my podcast, Revitalize America's Strategies for Rural Prosperity. At the end of the day, we need to make sure that our small towns are thriving all throughout Montana, and it can't just be us here in the capital city that are getting all the attention from you and the media folks. So thank you so much for your time today, and I hope that everybody does amazing when these new grant programs that I'm proposing come out. So you can see there how it goes. I was a little bit heavy-handed there at the end, and honestly, those two were pretty close together, so it's not that hard to pivot from one to the other. In the future, in the past and in the future, I've had difficult ones in the past. In the future, I want to have more difficult ones, but I thought this was a good re-intro since we haven't done it in a little bit. But now that we've gone through that segment, let's jump into our article from today. It comes from Mises.org. A Fed rate will not solve our economic problems. And we have talked about this many times on this podcast before, that the economy, and when I say economy, there are lots of different metrics of observing the economy. You obviously have statistics that come out from economic firms that actually do these regular, analyses of what's going on within the economy. But most people, when they say the economy, they look to Wall Street because Wall Street, in theory, is supposed to be an indicator of what the value of different companies within our economy have. So, if the values of companies are going up, in theory, they're having higher productivity, they're making more revenue, and that means that they're doing well. They're able to employ more people, they're able to put more resources into actually developing new products and also actually improving the ones they have and lowering the prices for said products. So you can see, in theory, why Wall Street would be a good indicator, or at least a semi accurate indicator, of what is going on within the economy. It hasn't been that way for quite some time, obviously. The progressives will come in and say, well, hey, it's all because of stock buybacks, it's because of cushy relationships between people on Wall Street, the banks, and also the companies that are being founded, because their CFOs come from those banks and they get really good deals when they want to IPO and things like that. And while I think some of those criticisms, or I say out of those two criticisms, I think the last one is probably better. Stock buybacks, I've had conversations about them before. They're not just a way to enrich the people that are within that company. They actually provide for bonuses. They actually take most of those bought back stocks and put them into a fund, and they're not actually allowed to just dissolve them. Normally, what they do is they give them to executives. They sometimes make them priority stocks. Sometimes they just keep them as general stock, and then actually give it to people so that they don't necessarily have more voting rights than if they were to do a priority stock kind of system for the reimbursement or for bonuses. But this way, the people that are working there are actually invested in the company. We've gone over this before. I think that argument is a little bit more tenuous, but also I could see, if you really did believe that corporations are just bad actors, I could see how you would get to the logic where you're saying, whoa, 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 stock buybacks is literally just to juice their numbers. There may be something to that with some corporations, but overall, normally there is an actual logistical and logical reason to buying back some of these stocks. But to go to the other criticism that wouldn't necessarily come from the progressives, which would come from the populists overall, it's the fact that the economy has become, or the Wall Street indices, all of them, whether it be the Nasdaq, whether it be the S&P, whether it be the Dow Jones, they've become so untethered from reality simply because of the nature of people trying to game them. So whether it's your GameStops, your Wall Street bets, the Reddit posts coming in Reddit forum trying to come in and juice it for money, whether it be the shorters trying to make a quick buck even though they don't necessarily think that the company's fundamentals aren't there. They don't necessarily like one or two things. They go on to some of the shows, the MSNBCs, the CBSs, and they go to like Market Watch and they say, well, this fundamental here. And by doing that, they can have some effect on the outcome of the stock. Now, I'm not going to say it's direct market manipulation, but they can to some degree, especially if it's like, I guess Jim Cramer isn't actually that accurate. And when people look at his record, they see that he's not anymore. So he doesn't necessarily have the credibility, but some people still have the credibility to come out and say, well, hey, it's not going to go well here, XYZ. Also, it can create bubbles, which I think we had the .com bubble. Now we're having definitely an AI bubble. Housing bubble is kind of exterior. That was more of a bank process than the Wall Street itself. Then again, you could argue that that was technically a Wall Street bubble, not just a banking bubble, but we'll assume from here that there are two major bubbles that we know of, at least during my lifetime, that are very reminiscent in everybody's head, which are the .com bubble and now the AI bubble. And because there's such a craze around some of these technologies, these new companies, the fundamentals go by the wayside, especially when you look at the way that people make money online. The idea is, especially in Silicon Valley, is grow, 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 grow. And then once you have the user base and you've been burning through cash all this time, then you can start making money. And while that is a fair enough model, and I'm not trying to directly criticize them, because some of the big companies have actually come out of this model. There's no doubt about that. That doesn't mean that it's actually good for Wall Street, because at the end of the day, it portrays something falsely. If these companies are just burning through cash, and all these different VCs and all these different brokers are saying, well, it's okay, they're just burning through cash, we can just pour more money into them, it provides a false idea of what they're actually doing. And for the average investor, they're not necessarily going and doing the research of how much they're losing per quarter. They're not hopping on some of the calls and listening to what the board is saying. They're not actually voting their shares. And then for the more advanced investors, they're obviously doing a little bit of their research. But for the layman who isn't even invested at all, or at least is just watching it, they're like, oh, okay, Tesla must be doing really well. They just hit the largest market cap ever for the company. So it gives a false idea of what is going on within our economy to the outside. If you're in it, maybe you have a little bit of a better idea. But then also, there's this extra layer, this extra criticism on top of it, which is the people on Wall Street have become too dependent on the Fed rate. We've seen it explicitly after COVID, the reactions to what Jerome Powell says, whether he says he's cutting rates, whether he says he's raising rates, whether he's saying he's going to do 4 rate cuts within the year, or if he's going to do 2. And all these different things have led to a sense of dread over the words of one man. Now, this one man does direct the Fed, which ensures that money is flowing throughout the economy and can affect the interest rate, the rate at which money is loaned out. So fair enough. But this is the insane system that we live in, where basically right now Wall Street is in flux, waiting for one man to say, oh, we're going to allow more easy money into the economy, which then allows people to easily, with that easy money that's just flowing around, to invest in things and then inflate the prices of these different stocks again. So you can see how it's an even more corrupt, I don't want to say corrupt bargain. It is an even more outrageous and outlandish system than is first believed by the average, like I said, layman. So let's jump into what Mises actually has to say here, because we set the stage for it. And if you want to hear more about this, I've done entire episodes. I've done multiple episodes that don't necessarily cover just this topic, but multiple episodes where you can get tidbits of this for quite some time. But let's jump into Mises here, because Mises is trying to make a very specific argument about this time that we are in, especially after what happened at the end of last week, beginning of this week. Quote, many establishment-friendly economists and political figures are dismissing concerns that the surge in unemployment and resulting scare on Wall Street represent a recession. However, some are clearly worried. Senator Elizabeth Warren, for instance, used jobs data to restate her argument that the Fed is waiting too long to cut rates. She said Fed Chair Jerome Powell risks driving the economy into a ditch and that he needs to cancel his summer vacation and cut rates now. And Elizabeth Warren, a obviously very proud and loud and proud boaster of modern monetary theory, where we can basically bet against ourselves for the future, which is, oh yeah, we can just keep printing money now and we'll be able to pay back all of our debts and things like that in the future based on growing productivity. And I'm sorry, we haven't had growing productivity, or at least large leaps in productivity, since probably the early 2000s. I mean, we've had small leaps here or there, and everybody says with new technologies, with AI, productivity is going to go up. We have not seen the results of that yet. Maybe, like I said, maybe it will happen. Maybe with AI, we'll see a jump in productivity as things start to penetrate into the market a little bit more. And productivity doesn't necessarily come right out of the blue. When the steam engine came around, it wasn't a instant, oh, hey, 5 years later, boom, there we go, everything's more productive. It took time for different uses of the steam engine to be found, to have different models for different industries. So, of course, as technology permeates, we'll start to see the productivity boost. But we haven't seen a really large productivity or a meaningful productivity boost in quite some time. And that's how you can argue that you can bet against the future. That's how you can say that, okay, it's good to have 2% inflation, because this is keeping the money going, keep the money flowing, and then allowing productivity to increase, meaning people can do more with the time that they're putting in. So if you have an 8-hour day in 1995 versus an 8-hour day in 2025, and nothing really changes in between that besides productivity, you're still getting more done, meaning you can add more value into the economy with the same amount of time. That's why productivity is very, very important. And that's the argument of a lot of people with modern monetary theory and always betting on the future and saying, hey, we can pay off those debts in the future, which is okay in theory. In theory, if productivity is always constant, which it isn't, but if productivity is always constant, then yeah, you can make that argument. But the whole point is the economy is not a linear graph that, okay, everything can be factored in exactly as it is and we can see it rise, or even a downward graph. Oh, we can factor in all the declining factors and we'll go straight down. No, if it's up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, volatility, and it shows trends either upwards or downwards or even just holding steady. Because guess what? Economic factors are absolutely crazy. It's not at the beginning of the week, you saw it. It wasn't just the US market that was scaring the Wall Street guys. It wasn't just Jerome Powell. It was also some of Japan's policies. When we had a housing crash in China with Evergreen, we saw some ripple effects over here. So there are thousands upon thousands of factors that go into this, which create volatile markets. That's just how it's going to be. So to pretend as though that we can just have a magic solution where we can try to bet on the future, where we can just fix unemployment, it's not that simple. Just cutting rates is not going to be the way to do it. Because the thing is, the whole idea of laissez-faire economics is you let the quote unquote okay, we're going to pretend there is an invisible hand here. I'm not saying the invisible hand has its own mind. I'm saying the invisible hand exists. And the idea behind the invisible hand is that it permeates the market and it is a summation of all the different decisions and factors going across the entire market. And what happens there versus the direct involvement of the government hand is once the government hand goes in and changes one thing, the ripple effects go down the economy, and there are other disparate effects that the government has to come in and now fix. The invisible hand, the whole reason it's called the invisible hand is because it's unseen. So it cannot directly be blamed, quote unquote, for any sort of problem and therefore be said justifiably that, okay, hey, you affected this, so you have to fix this other aspect. And okay, if you don't understand what I'm getting at here, what I'm trying to really focus on is the invisible hand is a summation of everything, like I said at the very beginning. But that also means that every single factor is taken into account there, and you cannot simply adjust one little factor and get that exact same outcome, or necessarily know that you're going to get a better outcome because it is a summation of everything. Versus the way that governments approach it, which is, we can come in and tinker just one thing here, one thing here, one thing here, and then there are ripple effects downward that they did not foresee. And since they've already made the step of encountering or directly intervening into the economy in order to get an outcome that they wish for, then guess what happens? They continue to do so. They continue to come in and take the, jiggle this around. Well, we can turn this thing here. We can lower interest rates here. And when you start doing this, you have a government who is, one, taking the lives of people into their own hands, trying to warp the economy. But also, you start to have the economy look to the government and say, okay, well, what is the government going to do next? What is the Fed, technically an independent bank, technically, even though it's sponsored by the U.S. government, abolish the Fed. I think anybody who at this point looks at the Fed and says, hey, yeah, it's a really great thing, no, abolish the Fed. Absolutely get rid of it. It will be turmoil for probably the rest of my lifetime, and I am totally okay with that happening if we can get the government out of directing where, why, how people invest, because that's exactly what they're doing right now. If the interest rate was not artificial, if the interest rate was not mandated, essentially, the lending rate of money was not mandated by the Fed, you would probably see, one, a large outflow of money from these speculative stocks, and it would go into your surefire companies that you know are going to survive. The Wall Street boys would say, okay, hey, we don't necessarily know if we're going to have easy money in the future, so we want to ensure that our money is in safe places. And what's a safe place? A fundamentally sound company. That is what we need to focus on. We need to make sure that those companies survive, get our support, get our love, get our attention, and we need to make sure that the economic system, the Wall Street method, is to boost up and allow an opportunity for the average common day person to invest in those solid companies. Because, one, we want the companies to do well, but also we want to provide a path to ownership for those people who are in let's say rural Minnesota. We want to provide them a pathway to ownership of something that will actually appreciate, they can sell and they can make money off of, and then they can retire or they could pass down to their kids. It's actually a way of owning property and prospering and passing it down and allowing our system to work without the government necessarily being able to come in and intervene. Right now, if you have a retirement account and you have 100 shares of Coca-Cola, that is a fundamentally sound company. There you go. Great. You've set up yourself. You have property that besides the physical land that you live on, you have your own private property. You can hand it down to your kids. You can sell it for retirement. You have an asset. But still, even in the system where you own that fundamentally sound company, guess what? The Fed can say, oh, well, you know what? Actually, we're going to ban this type of soda. Or, sorry, not the Fed. I say the federal government. Or even New York. We're going to ban this certain size soda. You can't do that. These are actually ways that the government indirectly and directly gets involved in the economy. Then Coca-Cola shares go pew straight through the ground. Oh, hey, you can't sell in New York. New York is the 5th largest market for Coca-Cola. Oh no, you can't sell your biggest size. That's actually going to hurt the stock price. Oh, the federal government comes in and says, hey, we're going to completely ban sodas. We're going to completely ban XYZ. Pew, there you go. Stocks right through the floor. Obviously, Coca-Cola and all these other companies, soda companies, they have lobbyists. So I don't necessarily know if we can see that happening, but the reason that they have lobbyists, if you have a problem with lobbyists, the reason they have lobbyists is because the government has so much control over the economy and how it operates that they want to make sure that they don't get, I don't want to say the word, they don't get done in. Let's put it that way. They don't get passed over and forced into a corner where they can't make money. They have their lobbyists go up there and say, hey, government, I know you're worried about these health issues, and you're trying to ban these certain chemicals. We actually use some of these chemicals. How about we do a 5-year phase-out ban? And they actually advocate on the interests of the companies such as, in this case, for example, Pepsi or Coca-Cola. So you could see why the system, a lot of the parts that people don't like about our system, they actually come from the government being too big and too involved. If the government's not too big and too involved, you don't necessarily have to have lobbyists in order to protect your own interests. If they're not controlling the interest rate, you do not necessarily have to worry about whether or not one day your savings is going to go from top notch to maybe a little bit mid-tier because Jerome Powell's talking about rate cuts and Wall Street got scared. And there are plenty of other ripple-on examples, but Mises is pointing out something here. I don't always agree with Mises.org. I don't. Trust me. But especially when it comes to economy things, there's just, I keep looking at Austrian economics. And while, yes, I understand that you can't prove a counterfactual, which is, well, if we did it this way, but it makes sense to 90% of my brain. The 10% of my brain that always doubts everything, yeah, it can try to poke a few holes in there. There's no doubt about that, which is if another country starts doing protectionist policies, then you're actually getting the raw end of the deal, and you just have to you basically use raw economic power and just be that much better to overcome it. And even then, there's not necessarily a guarantee if you can't access a market whatsoever. I understand that these sort of things exist, but I still think Austrian economics, especially on a national scale, when talking about within a nation, is one of the most sound economic theories, at least, that I have looked at and practiced. And I understand that, Keynesians may have a different idea. Modern monetary theorists may have another idea. And I think at least with modern monetary theory, I feel as though I've broken it down a little bit to poke some holes in it. But, if you have an opposite opinion, throw it in the comment section. I'd love to hear it. We've talked a long time about why the market manipulation by the Fed and the government is not a good thing. Now let's actually look at some of the consequences. We're going to jump to an article from the Wall Street Journal, and the headline reads, Disney posts first ever streaming profit, warns of pressures on theme parks business. Now, when I read that, I was like, wait, hold on. You're telling me that they have never, until this quarter, actually had a positive quarter for their streaming services, that's absolutely shocking to me, especially during COVID. Because then again, they did have lower prices at COVID times. It was kind of like the adoption cost. They had it really low. They had I think it was $7.99 or $8.99 for the largest plan, so that you could actually buy it. It feels cheap, and then you can get access to everything. That's what they do. They start the prices nice and low. They start the subscription low. As more people get into it, as they start offering more content, as they just need to start juicing you for the money, they start upping the cost. It comes in one small little email, maybe a little text. Oh, by the way, your costs are going to go up. And you just blow past it because you're like, oh, Disney Plus is promoting something else. And because you have a credit card in there, because you have a debit card in there, it's just a recurring cost that you do not necessarily notice. So that when it makes sense that they're making money now, especially after all the price hikes that I've seen come through my mailbox. And honestly, I don't really watch Disney Plus that much anymore, except for maybe Marvel stuff. So I honestly may unsubscribe here soon. I've been thinking about it for quite some time. I said it a while ago, especially with Hulu, because Hulu is just jacking up their prices like crazy. I didn't actually end up unsubscribing from Hulu, so we'll see if I unsubscribe from Disney Plus. I probably should unsubscribe from all of them because I really don't use any of them, except maybe Apple TV. And honestly, I'm coming back to the Apple TV. And when I say Apple TV, I don't necessarily mean the service, I mean the app, because I actually enjoy buying my own movies. And then again, it's in a digital form, so technically I don't own a hard copy, but I actually enjoy that process. And I think there's something great about actually owning your own set of movies rather than leasing the rights to view them from other people. So, maybe there's actually a reapproach that needs to happen here. But hey, that's on my own personal end. If you have your own thoughts on it, I'm sure you do, especially living in our subscription economy or our leasing economy. I'm sure you have plenty of thoughts. You know that I have plenty of thoughts. I've talked about this before, no doubt. But let's jump into this actual article describing what's going on at Disney. Quote, Disney's streaming unit, which includes flagship platform Disney Plus, general entertainment service Hulu, and sports-focused ESPN Plus, became profitable 1 quarter ahead of schedule, producing operating income of $47 million on a $6.38 billion in revenue, the company said Wednesday. So for those of you who are not business savvy, in revenue, they made $638 billion. And that on top of that, well, not on top of that, out of that, $47 million was actually profit. So that means their operating cost is somewhere around $5.9 billion. That's insane. No, actually, I take that back. It's somewhere around 6.3, minus 5. So about $6.33 billion is their cost, their operating cost. That's insane. That's insane. And I can see now when I look at that number, and I forgot I had actually read this number the first time. When I look at that number, I do understand why it's taken them so long to make so much money. They had to build out the infrastructure. They had to buy all the resources, probably buy or build their own data centers in order to house everything. Imagine, they used to talk about, oh, the movies are coming out of the Disney Vault. Imagine they just have a giant, golden computer, a golden data server that says, the Disney Vault, this is where we keep everything encrypted. Nobody can access it until we release it out of the Disney Vault again. And for those of you who are not old enough to remember the Disney Vault, they would actually keep some of their movies in reserve. They wouldn't just put reruns on TV. They would release them after 25 years back into theaters back in the day. So, the next generation of people, the next young kids could be taken out to go see some Disney movies, and the parents could go relate and be like, oh, I'm going to spend my money on nostalgia while also bringing my kid into it. Oh, it was actually a brilliant business plan from their point of view. So, but the interesting part here, and for those of you who have money in Disney, you're probably thinking, woo, okay, baby. I like that. I like the fact that streaming, it was kind of a break-in sector. We knew Disney was going to do pretty well, but Bob Iger was able to turn around pretty quickly. Well, guess what has happened more recently on a different side of the company? This is not talking about streaming anymore. This is the other part that was mentioned within that headline, which is their entertainment unit is not necessarily I guess they call it their experiences unit. Quote, the financial chief said that roughly 60% of the experiences business is made up of domestic theme parks and cruise ship business, while the other 40% is international parks and consumer products. While attendance was flat last quarter at parks, per capita spending rose slightly. Overall, I would call this a bit of a slowdown that's being more than offset by the entertainment business, Johnson said. And then they're also going here and they're talking beyond Disney. Quote, Comcast, which owns and operates the Universal Studios chain of parks, reported weak results in late July, mostly because of their lower domestic park attendance. And it goes on to talk about them and business, Disney theme parks, and so on and so forth. But that's really interesting to me. The fact that the at-home streaming services are starting to do better in the events where you have to go out and actually do something, they're actually losing money. I hope this is a trend that reverses. And let's be clear. I know that it's really expensive to go to Disney World and do everything versus to stay at home and experience some things from the Disney World. It's actually cheaper to do it that way. I totally understand. And it's sad that we live in an economy where you can't actually go out and do anything anymore because it's too expensive. But I hope this is a trend that reverses itself, because I would much prefer, even if it's a little bit more expensive, I would much prefer everybody has the capital. And it might be just annoying, driving to get anywhere, or having a whole bunch of people in the airport leaving from where I am, Dulles, to go into Orlando. I may see all the Mickey hats and I may get frustrated, but I'd much rather have an economy and a people that are interested in going out and experiencing things and doing things rather than sitting at home and just being consumers. Then again, flying somewhere where you're just going to be a consumer, is it necessarily worth it? Maybe I should completely change my standards. Maybe we should have an outdoor Disney park where you have to hike to all the different like cottages or little things. Who knows? But it's an interesting trend in the economy, or sorry, I say economy. It's an interesting trend in where the money is actually being allocated or how people are spending it. And also, it's very interesting as an overall analysis of the American culture, in my opinion, because it doesn't surprise me when I hear that, when people are retreating from in-person experiences to online / at-home experiences. That does not surprise me whatsoever. Then again, I say that as I'm sitting here recording this for online, so maybe I'm part of the problem. Maybe that's it. Maybe I need to do some in-person stuff. Maybe way, like 25 years in the future, I'll consider it. Right now, I ain't got the time for that, Chief, honestly. All right, so let's jump to our final article that talks about, excuse me, that talks about the AI election. We've talked about this before. It was last week. I think it was 3 episodes ago that we actually did a little bit of a segment on this, which is how AI is going to affect our election. And now we're going to do another one, but this is kind of an attack piece from the American prospect, and it's going after Elon Musk and Gronk. And I'm not going to spend too much time on this because, like I said, it feels like a attack piece, but it as a new AI model, Gronk, and one that hasn't necessarily had the resources that OpenAI has had, it does actually prove a point about AI in general. Quote, a July post on Gronk, just hours after Joe Biden had exited the presidential race, claimed that the deadline for presidential candidates to appear on the 2024 general election ballot had passed. But those 9 states had more than enough time to change the ballots to insert the names of Harris and her running mate, Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota. Though the incorrect information was only available to subscribers at the premium level and above, it took X, a site with about 250 million daily active users, a week to deal with the problem. So the point being here that the untested AI systems are going to fall behind here. They're going to get extra criticized because they have not had the resources poured into them in order to be able to correct this sort of problem. They also don't have the live team in order to actually go in and fix it very quickly. And when you have a thing like Gronk, which is, let's be clear, you can put it in like funny mode, humorous mode versus serious mode. So it's not meant to be the most serious AI out there overall. The point being that there's going to be a lot of hatred towards these sort of things. There's going to be a lot of criticism. And I think there's just some general advice that I need to give, or we all need to take it into mind here. Don't trust ChatGPT. Don't trust Claude. Don't trust any other AI model. Don't trust Gronk with this sort of information. Honestly, even with Google, double check it. Maybe you should just go to the actual source, go to your local elections office and ask what's going on here. Because at the end of the day, this is not the most trustworthy source. These AI models specifically are gathering information from a whole bunch of places. Maybe they have a stored log from 2013 of the old state laws, and then it references that, and guess what? It's out of date. So all of these sort of AI programs, even Google with their Gemini, with Copilot from Microsoft, just take everything they say with a grain of salt. Honestly, that should be how it is, even when they proclaim to be the most honest, truthful, best sort of, how should I say, information systems out there. At the end of the day, the best way to get your information is still go in person or call the place. Guess what? We have phones. Almost everybody has a phone nowadays. And at least everybody should have some sort of landline. Then again, not everybody does. I understand. But call the place. Call the elections office. You know what? Call the your congressman's office. Call the state house or the state senate and say, hey, what is actually on the books here? And they may not like that you're doing that, but you very well could do that, and maybe they'll get you to a research assistant who can actually go and find the information, or they already know the information. At the end of the day, we got to trust the people more than we trust these AI systems, and you're going to expect a lot of these articles out here. I don't think that Gronk is going to actually make that much of a difference. I don't think OpenAI is going to make that much of a difference. I think the adoption rate of these sort of systems is actually very, very low compared to what is believed in. A lot of it's being done on the back end of services who want, AI systems to be able to generate things and do other sort of tasks and automate certain tasks on the back end. A lot of it isn't necessarily being done by individual users, and the individual users that are really getting in there and using it all the time are the ones that are knowledgeable enough to see when hallucinations happen. Then again, that's not always true, and every single person could just hop on to any of these systems and get false information. So that's why we have to put out that advisory, hey, be safe, be careful, so on and so forth. And if you see more articles like that, also just be wary. Maybe the full breadth of the context isn't actually put into that headline, because remember, the headlines is this election, that the intelligence could be artificial. And I think that is a good summation, but that doesn't necessarily actually get into the breadth of what's going on there. It's just kind of an overview as it should be for an article, but it does. I don't want to call it inaccurate. It's not misinformation. It could have a little bit more context. It's meant to kind of provoke you, scare you into clicking it. All right, but with all that scary stuff out of the way, let's jump into our daily delight. This one comes from Debbie.Graham at ourmedia.co.uk. Wow, that is a really long at, but hey, it is what it is. And the headline reads, all you need to know about the beautiful Arctic fox, including how it survives harsh Arctic conditions. And if you want to know about Arctic foxes, or you just want to see some cute images of Arctic foxes, you want to see them when this is when they have their white fur. As I learned here, they actually have different coats depending on the season when they're shedding, but during the winter and during heavy snow periods, they normally have their white coats that they can blend in, obviously. If you want to learn more about them, you want to see those amazing photos of them, you can come to this article. All of the articles, including this one, will be linked in the description below that like and subscribe button. Also down there, you can find the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Casts, Podvine, as well as the Twitter handle, where I post a Twitter tirade every Tuesday and Thursday. Actually, over the course of this last 2 weeks, things have been a little bit hectic, and I've actually reposted some of the old ones. I'm going to try to avoid doing that in the future, but desperate times, desperate measures, and I also reposted ones that I thought were actually genuinely good. So, with all that, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe, don't die.